Going live.
Okay, fantastic.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, friends from the Asian Productivity Organization, member countries, and all around the world, greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization, APO Secretariat in Tokyo, Japan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. The Asian Productivity Organization, APO, is one of the leading intergovernmental organizations tasked to promote productivity, innovation, competitiveness across member countries in the Asia Pacific, with the Secretariat based in Tokyo, Japan. So, a very big warm welcome to the inaugural APO Productivity Talk on actionable intelligence post-COVID-19 sense-making in an age of fear and uncertainty, where we will discuss how to build economic resilience, ensure business continuity, and maintain individual productivity to address COVID-19 pandemic and future crises, catastrophes, and uncertainties. Today, we are featuring two world-leading experts, Professor Keith Carter and Professor Datuk Xavier. Professor Keith Carter is an associate professor at the National University of Singapore, School of Computing, where he is also the director of the NUS FinTech Lab. Hello, Keith. Professor Dr. John Anthony Xavier is a professor at the Putra Business School, Malaysia. Hello, Dr. John.
Hi, Joshua, how are you?
I'm good. On a more somber note, the Japanese government has just declared a state of emergency over Tokyo and 6 other major prefectures yesterday evening. As I speak to you now, we are now in a state of emergency. Few, if any one of us, could have imagined a COVID-19 pandemic like this as country after country bans international travel due to the outbreak. While measures to contain the pandemic have taken a huge toll on public health systems, they have also crippled economies and businesses, especially SMEs. Member countries now face the greatest economic challenge in APO's history. Globally, fiscal stimulus and monetary policies undertaken are just as unprecedented. The Asian Development Bank predicts that this pandemic will shave off about 1.5% to 4% of Asia's GDP this year. And the World Bank estimates that this pandemic will shave off as much as 4% of the global GDP. It remains to be seen how this situation will pan out eventually. Until then, stay safe, healthy, yet productive. Sit back, relax in your house, and enjoy our very first live-streamed APO Productivity Talk with our experts, Professor Keith Carter and Professor Datuk John Xavier. We now have the presentation by Professor Keith Carter. Keith Carter is an associate professor at the National University of Singapore. He is also a director of NUS FinTech Lab. He is also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Actionable Intelligence, a guide to delivering business results with big data fast. I will now pass over the time to Professor Keith Carter. Keith, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to share with you some key thoughts around what we ought to be doing, how we ought to be thinking in regards to this crisis. How can we not just survive, but also thrive, especially as governments and leaders who are being looked to for comfort, security, and more. The key things I want you to take away from my presentation is that there's an opportunity here for us to really grow and change for the better. And personally, but mainly as the government and leaders in the world. Let's take a look through the presentation here that I have for you. And a couple of key things that we'll get into is in terms of what's actionable intelligence. How does it work? How do we connect the dots together with this current crisis? And in particular, actionable intelligence is about having the right information in the right person's hands at the right time in order to improve outcomes. what's been so interesting to me over these past several years, and I've had 3 lives. I've lived in Asia for 7 years, working at the university. Before that, my prior life was in New York City and working at Estee Lauder. And before that, I was at Accenture working on Wall Street. So in those 3 lives, I've seen a lot of transformation, a lot of change. But for some reason, something sometimes stops organizations and people from developing as much as they could. And so organizations start off on digital transformation and ways that they'll make their businesses or governments act more effectively. And so who led the digital transformation in your company or in your organization? Was it the CEO, CTO, or has it been COVID-19? I've got to tell you, it's been amazing to me that people can no longer go to bank branches and they can't. A wet ink signature could actually be, if someone looks at it and makes sure, is this the person who signed the document? That can actually be a death sentence these days. And so I'm really amazed by how organizations have been hesitant to move to digital, and yet COVID-19 is making that a reality. As Joshua just mentioned, you can't go outside in Tokyo anymore. In Singapore, the new measures have been introduced where we can only go outside if we're going to exercise, and only for a bit, or essential services, hospital, and of course, banking and other things as well. So we have an opportunity now to use this crisis for actually growing. There's another aspect here that we as leaders need to consider, and it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's no question that the most important part of life is the physiological needs of having a place to live, having a safety, making sure that you have good food on the table, having a sense that as you go to sleep, when you wake up with the same things, when you go to work, you'll be safe as well. And so Maslow's hierarchy of needs set a foundation for what a truly smart nation is. There's been a lot of buzz around, oh, we need a smart nation. We need IoT, we need 5G. Let's do transformation. Let's bring in technology. If this type of hierarchy isn't in place first, no need to have IoT and 5G. Those are nice, fancy things that can lead to the top, love and belonging, esteem and self-actualization. Long before we get there, the foundation needs to be in place. And this crisis is exposing countries that have prioritized this pyramid and countries that have not. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Singapore. They focused first on, hey, listen, don't run to the supermarket. And they showed, as soon as there was a crisis and run of the supermarket, the ministers here went to the storehouse and were able to show, look at all the food that we have. Then they published in the newspaper, look at these supply chains we're maintaining. They made sure that the foundation was there. They also went and said, hey, listen, let's make sure our digital processes are in place. So, for example, medical certificates were immediately went digital, so that then in the first couple of days, 40,000 medical certificates to show that you could stay out from work were issued digitally. This type of activity meant that the doctors and the patients also weren't exposing themselves to the danger that's here. China, of course, also took the interesting step of saying, hey, no more cash. If we put cash on the market, it might be touched, and so you might get sick as well. So COVID has come and made things more digital. If you were hesitant about going digital before, now is the opportunity. And so as leaders, we need to sit back and think, where are we in this zone? Are we in the fear zone where we're considering, wow, how do I make sure that I protect myself, and I'm locking down my supply, and I'm sending out and forwarding all the spam messages of terrible things that are going on. Our newspaper is only negative news. Are we in that zone? Or are we in the learning zone where we're encouraging others to stop and think, wait a second, is it really as bad as it is? Yes, but what can we do about it? We can do something. We can work together. Am I putting my need to go and visit somebody or execute some business in the old way, above what's the new normal, which is where I need to just get on a conference like this and talk with people, but by video. And we've really seen the opportunity to grow. Look at this now. I think Joshua mentioned there were how many people online, Joshua? 70 plus, 80 people that
Well, there's about 200 people right now.
200, fantastic. I mean, can you imagine? We couldn't possibly all have 200, and from all around the world as well. So we have this opportunity to grow, and I'm really proud of the APO organization, Joshua, and all the team members that have made this possible today, because it's not about standing still. It's about taking that next step, experimenting with new ways of delivering education, delivering insights, and using technology that costs $15 a month. But what's stopping us from getting onto this right now? And so I wanted to introduce a concept here that some organizations are way ahead, way ahead in terms of being ready for COVID-19. One of them is a challenger to the banking system, which I like to call Bank G, Grab. Grab is a taxi app. They're used by more than 86 million people, $6 billion valuation, very much invested by SoftBank and other organizations that kind of see and look into the future. But why are they so ready for COVID-19? How many of you went to the Grab branch and signed up? You had to sign with your signature, and you had to show them your ID, and you had to shake hands with the branch manager. Did you have to do that to join with Grab? No, right? There's no one has to go to a branch to set up. And what's so interesting is that they provide the things that banks do. So let's talk about that. I have a wallet. The wallet is awesome. I can use the wallet in Singapore, over in Manila, over in Hanoi. Then we can also get deliveries. I can order food. I can get taxis, book hotels. And finally, the knife that's in the whole system that Grab is bringing to the table is the ability to do pay later, to provide loans. So everyone's been talking about, oh, we should go to the unbanked, we should help people that can't get loans. Grab said, forget about all these things and oh, you have to sign. No, you can safely sign up for a Grab account, go and get a loan, a basic payday type of loan, go and do lots of things that are within your normal daily life. And Grab, of course, is not the only one. Zalo in Vietnam, Uber, other organizations, Gojek are all doing these types of things and are completely digital. So why did we still need to go to the bank branch in order to do things? So there's a new global supply chain that needs to be put in place. People, and are rightfully so, concerned. Where is food going to come from? How am I going to have my essential needs? That physiological set of needs that Maslow first talked about is why people run to the supermarket and so quickly get things. We need to take a deep breath, because if we can have people realize, prioritize food, clean water, ventilators, these are the things that need to be put in place. Not flying still in the traditional way, not going and doing traditional things. We need to make sure these are in place. Then the challenge. How do we get people to see the big picture? Work from home, work from home. It's easy. At the National University of Singapore, I've been teaching my classes online since January. And I've had to teach negotiation. How do you teach negotiation like this? It's possible, and my students had a great time. How do I have guest speakers come into class? Yesterday, we had 3 management consultants come into the classroom virtually like this. And the students and everyone were so engaged. Joshua popped by and visited for that as well from Tokyo. It was great. And we had people come and visit our class in Singapore from California on purpose. It was fantastic. How do we automate mundane processes? If we were concerned about robotic process automation, you should not be. Robots do not replace jobs. Robots replace tasks so that humans can provide even better value. Please, I'm going to repeat that. Robots don't replace jobs. They replace tasks so humans can do more and deliver improved value, because there are things that humans do really well and there are things that robots do really well, but they're separate things, right? So make sure if you're a leader and you're looking at automating things, don't let the CFO take this role. He'll just say, oh, I can save time, I can cut people. That's completely the wrong way. Look at how I can save time and enhance my people. And the last thing is increasing productivity. And again, I'm so proud of APO looking at how, listen, we've saved a lot of productivity right now. 200 plus people just got to sit down in their living room and have a front row seat of what we're talking about here. Instant productivity saving, no flight, no, traveling in, suitcases, all the things, tremendous productivity. And one leader said to me, Keith, my leadership ability has increased so much because of COVID-19. He said, because instead of flying to 20 different countries, I just get onto a call, have a discussion, and then I don't feel bad about having to go for a drink or have linger around. I just go right to the next one and so forth. So he's become a lot more efficient. We've saved so much. So now is not the time to go and cut people's jobs, but it's more an opportunity to go and create new streams of revenue. This is where the FinTech Lab comes in. As a director there, our vision has been to provide sustainable experiential education on financial technology. So I've told you about things like automation. How do we do digital? What do we need to do to not go to the bank branch anymore? Sorry, bank branch managers, but it doesn't mean you lose your job. You actually work in a whole new way, but let's work together on that. So the first is collaboration, but the second is we need to enable leaders like yourselves and others to realize, hey, there's corporate capabilities that need to be established. And then lastly, we need to have a heart for our people. People are the reason that we opened the bank, are the reason that we had the store. We can't forget that. It wasn't the goods, it wasn't the service, it was what the people needed. So we need to then take care of people, make sure to develop them as well. So if you do decide to work with National University of Singapore FinTech Lab, let us know. We're a neutral party. We look at what works, what doesn't work, and just share our thoughts on that. So John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. This is no better time for this phrase that this gentleman had put together many, many years ago for us to be using it now. What can you do? What can you do to delight the person who is working for you in a critical time? What can you do to call people that maybe are out of jobs and need some essential support, or at least a friendly voice to talk with, to pray with, to discuss the critical needs that they may have? And what can you do as leaders to challenge your organization? Can you go further? Can you think differently? And can you help this entire situation go from crisis to where we go to improvement? Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Keith. That is a very insightful presentation that you have given. If you may allow me to crystallize some of the things that you have discussed, Professor. So there are basically 5 main points that I've noted down. So first thing is, you believe that actionable intelligence is necessary to gain critical insights. You have shared how actionable intelligence and sense-making strategies based on facts and evidence can offer critical insights to governments, businesses, and community leaders to help them ride out this crisis. And then you can help them to increase their bottom lines. And secondly, you also talked about maintaining productivity and readiness using digital technology by passing through the zones of fear, learning, and growth, right? Exactly. And the third point you wanted to underscore was the importance of recognizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This has to be addressed by governments and business leaders. And fourth, you are looking at automation not as a situation where robots will replace jobs, but rather they are to replace tasks and to enhance the sanctity and value of the workers in their jobs. And fifth, you want and you advise governments, business leaders in the APO member countries to create new streams of revenue so that jobs are not lost, yet we can even do more to survive from crisis to crisis.
Exactly. Yes, the perfect
so
summary. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So, continuing the discussion is now Professor Datuk, Dr. John Anthony Xavier. Dr. Xavier is a professor at the Putra Business School, and he previously worked as an elite administrative and diplomatic officer for over 36 years in the Malaysian public service. He has also worked with the likes of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank Group, as well as served as a consultant to the governments of Kuwait, Kenya, and Sri Lanka. For his services to society and public service, Dr. Xavier was conferred the title of Datuk by His Majesty, the King of Malaysia. So thank you so much, Dr. Xavier, for your coming presentation, which is on public sector resilience. Public sector resilience come in the middle of the COVID-19 storm. The floor is yours, Dr. Xavier.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for your very kind words. Please allow me to thank the Asian Productivity Organization for kindly inviting me to give this talk. Keith took us very well through the various responses that have been occasioned at the national level, organizational level, and at the individual level, primarily in the area of digital transformation, using data and actionable intelligence. I would like to continue with this conversation and extend it to look at a broader economic perspective. What has COVID-19 have to say to us? And let me share with you some slides on this.
Thank you so much, Datuk Xavier.
The topic is public sector resilience, calm amid COVID-19 storm. The topic might sound rather misleading when the whole world is suffering a massive, terrible storm. Here we have a public sector in relative calm. I think, yes, on the surface, yes, they're all calm, but like the water like the duck under the water, they are paddling furiously to ensure that there is minimal damage occasioned by the pandemic upon people's lives and on the economy. So I would like to share with you 3 points. What is the medicine that the public sector is dispensing in seeking to minimize the impact of COVID-19 on private sector productivity and the larger economic growth? And then we want to see whether this medicine is working. Has it, to some extent, offset the loss of productivity? Has it stopped the decline of economic growth? And if it has not, then what are the policy choices available to the government and to public sectors around the world as to how best they could stop this COVID-19 rampaging the economy? Yes, as you rightly pointed out, Joshua, COVID-19 is ravaging economies. You mentioned about a 4% decline in growth. Yes, there have been sharp declines in GDP across the world. Stock markets have been busted. They have been gyrating so violently. Businesses are now shuttered and industries have been hit. And all these imposes a massive shock upon the economy. And you quoted some figures. Yes, they're very much right. There will be a 4% plunge in annual growth in Asia, like you said. And of course, this crisis will push some 11 million people into poverty in Asia alone. So when the economy is in shock, then people get a little worried about the future. The expectations of the future diminishes. Businesses will roll back their operations. They will roll back their investment plans. And accordingly, this will give rise to massive unemployment. Wages will decline. Stock prices bond prices, property values will decline, and all this will give a perception to the people that they are now poorer. And when they have this perception, then they will shrink their expenditure. So the crisis of this sort decimates demand in the economy. And unless the government comes in to intervene and break this vicious cycle, we are going to see more and more of these issues being repeated and the economy going on a downward spiral down towards recession and depression. And traditionally, governments have used two primary instruments, fiscal policy and monetary policy, to revive an economy that's under shock. So let us see what have governments done in the realm of fiscal policy and in the realm of monetary policy as a policy response towards this COVID-19 pandemic. Well, as you could see, countries that have been particularly afflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic have introduced massive stimulus packages in the hope that this will at least compensate the 40% loss in consumer confidence and consumption in the economy. And they hope through these stimulus expenditures, the economy can be kept afloat. As we can see, USA leads the pack with $2 trillion. Japan recently announced a stimulus package close to $1 trillion, and the list goes down. So every country is trying to cope with this crisis, and stimulus is the need of the hour. Now, the issue is, will these stimulus packages across the world help stem the downslide of the economy and productivity? That's the question that we now need to ask and answer. But before we do that, we also need to see what has been on the monetary policy side. Governments, together with the stimulus packages, have also loosened and made their monetary policy more accommodative. They have sought through the monetary policy to flush the economy with liquidity. So the Federal Reserve of the USA, for example, has brought down the interest rate to 0%. Many countries, Japan, Europe, America, have reintroduced quantitative easing, which is basically the printing of money to buy up the shares of banks. Sorry, not shares of the banks, but the assets of the banks, like the treasury securities that they hold, bonds that they hold, their loans that they have given, mortgages that they have given, so that by buying up this, central banks can inject more money into their balance sheets, and that will give them a bigger base to lend more to ailing businesses that are hungry for cash, because businesses have stalled and therefore they need cash to pay for their operating expenditure. So combined, have monetary policies and fiscal stimulus been able to stem the downslide of the economy and private sector productivity? Yes, I think to a certain extent, you would want to agree with me that fiscal stimulus and a loose monetary policy have saved jobs. They have supported workers. They have supported businesses. And the fiscal stimulus has, together with the liquidity that is now being flushed into the private sector and the banking system, has definitely increased aggregate demand. And therefore, we can say to some extent, they have stemmed the decline in productivity growth. But have they fully offset? That is the other question that now we would need to examine. Are the measures sufficient then to fully offset productivity decline? Well, they may not fully offset productivity decline simply because half the world is on a lockdown. And once there is a lockdown, people are indoors, there is no opportunity for them to go out to spend like they did before. And so lockdowns have contracted aggregate demand. They have disrupted supply chains because factories are shuttered. That factories that are critical in the respective supply chain path are now shuttered. Interest rates and QE, they are very good policy instruments, but their impact can only be felt over the longer term, perhaps even after the duration uh, of the pandemic. So the issue is, are they sufficient? Yes, they are necessary, but are they sufficient? And I think as of now, they have not been able to fully offset the productivity decline. And therefore, I think it requires a more fiscal response, greater expenditure. I think the stimulus packages will have to be reviewed, refined, added on. So keep on adding the stimulus package. There needs to be a more forceful fiscal response. There needs to be greater spending on capital expenditure, on infrastructure. But again, you may want to ask, but aren't these also long-term? Yes, they are. But whatever is the merits of capital spending and infrastructure spending, let it be done as quickly as possible so that we are able to flush the economy with greater consumption. And perhaps if these traditional instruments are not really doing the job immediately, then maybe we need to think of new economic tools. And one that is being floated now is helicopter money. It's not money that it flutters from the sky, but rather it is about governments and central banks crediting bank accounts of individuals who have been affected by the crisis, people who have been made jobless, people who have been particularly vulnerable because of the crisis. They are given money directly into their accounts. So funneling money direct to people's pockets will enable them to spend quickly to refloat the economy. Then again, how can consumers go out and spend when they are in a lockdown? Again, we are back to this conundrum as to how we could fully offset productivity decline. And banks too perhaps would need to take a haircut since they had taken a calculated risk in providing loans to their customers. And the customers' businesses are now in difficulty. So it's only right and proper that banks take a haircut and provide a partial exemption to the loans, at least to these businesses, to tide them over. But the question whether governments can fully offset productivity decline will hinge on the next policy choice, and that is economic cost versus lives. As you can see from this chart, if you look at the rate curve, this is above the x-axis. The rate curve demonstrates that these are the spikes in infection rate where there are no containment policies. But where there are no containment policies, then the impact, the damage to the economy is that much lighter, milder. But if there are harsh lockdowns like we have now, then yes, we will be able to flatten the curve, but we will be pushing the economy deeper into recession. So the issue is, do we value health or do we value wealth? China chose health and saved 700,000 lives from the virus. But in the process, during the first quarter of this year, they lost 10% of their GDP, equivalent to 320 billion. And thankfully, most of the governments have chosen health over wealth. So perhaps to fully ensure the recovery of private sector, productivity, and economic growth, we may have to wait till this issue, this pandemic tides over. Thank you, Joshua. I'm done.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate this presentation because it really talks about the economic policies in terms of fiscal stimulus as well as monetary policy and how they can help to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. We have also showed three main points, if I will. Public sectors around the world have primarily relied on their traditional economic tools of fiscal and monetary policies to counteract this damaging impact of the current pandemic. And second, you underscore that fiscal stimulus has boosted consumption because consumption has fallen as much as 40%. Monetary policy has ensured that the banking system is flushed with liquidity so that they do not seize up through loan defaults. And the additional liquidity can help the banks to lend more. And your final point is about whether these measures are enough. Apparently, they're not enough. So the situation perhaps calls for a more forceful fiscal stimulus. So public sectors and central banks may need to experiment with, like, I love the way you say, experiment with helicopter money, giving us money directly into our bank accounts. Or banks may need to take a haircut, partial write-offs of the loans. So it remains to be seen how fiscal and monetary policies will pan out for all our APO member countries. But thank you so much for this very informative PowerPoint presentation.
You're welcome.
And friends of the APO member economies, as well as all around the world, if you have any burning questions that you want to ask our world-leading experts, Professor Keith Carter, as well as Professor Datuk Xavier, feel free to write down your questions in the comment section of the YouTube channel below. Write down your questions and my colleagues will be collecting the questions and we will select and then ask our resource persons to answer. So without further ado, I want to quote a very famous interview last month. In the Harvard Business Review on the 23rd of March, 2020, best-selling author and leading expert on grief management, Dr. David Kessler, said that the world has changed, and it has. We know that this is temporary, I quote, but it doesn't feel that way. We feel that things will forever be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before September the 11th. Things will change, and this is the point at which they changed. So my question to both professors right now is, how do we move on? How do we process this collective grief? How can we make sense of things as the pandemic spread its long and fat tail? Keith, I will pass the time over to you first before we listen to John. So Keith.
How do we process this and get through it?
Yes.
By actually engaging like this, to participate in online sessions, to make sure that we turn our camera on when we're online too, to see each other's smiling faces, to realize that we're all in the same situation together. I liked what Datuk John had just shared about the critical points in deciding, governments and leaders having to decide. Do I prioritize the economy? Do I take a very strong stance around health? And this is a very tough decision because both can impact health, right? Both can impact the economy. They're very entwined. So all of us are facing the same challenge. The most important thing we can do as leaders is have a very clear response. And I read somewhere, a person with many wise advisors will be able to go out and win the next battle. And so I highly recommend, connecting with people you haven't reached out to in a while and saying, hey, how are you surviving this? What are you doing? How can we thrive and do that together?
That's great. Yeah, I like the point that you talk about staying connected with one another. So staying connected with one another could well be the critical success factor. So John, any further views on that?
Thanks, Joshua. I agree with you that things will not be the same as before the onset of this crisis. People will be a bit more apprehensive of their personal hygiene. People will be more conscious of social distancing. And as Keith rightly pointed out, leaders will now have to shoulder the burden of how to thrive, how to anticipate future crises. So it falls on leaders to be more anticipatory of what the future holds and being able to prevent this kind of crisis from impacting in such a bad way, in such a very damaging way as this crisis is currently doing to us, both at the level of the economy and at the level of individual lives. But at the same time, I think leaders will have to show grit and tenacity to overcome this, as Keith as rightly said. So there needs to be a real dedication, commitment on the part of leaders, business and government leaders to get the whole economy into shipshape as quickly as possible, as they should. So that requires a number of resets. Number one, at the level of the economy, governments will have to think, government leaders will have to think in terms of the apportionment of the budget. What is their priority? They will need to grapple with issues like guns and butter. Do we put more money on health and education or more money on security and defense? On the level of businesses now will have to be even more guarded of the future rather than going at breakneck speed in terms of growth and development of their businesses. They would need to factor in contingencies such as this, and at the same time introduce into their contracts force majeure provisions that could help them to cover their losses in the event of a black swan, like you rightly mentioned. And at the personal level too, the people should now realize that it is more important to take care of the environment than to go and simply produce, simply consume as though there is no tomorrow. So these are the resets that have to be done at the level of business and government leaders and at the individual level as well.
Thank you so much, John. This really sounds very sensible from both the government, business, and personal level. Governments need to reconsider how they proportion their resources against different priorities. So you talked about guns and butter, and this is really critical right now. And you talk about businesses, how they need to stay guarded and be more economically resilient towards the future. And on a personal level, also take care of the environment, how workers should produce and consume more responsibility after this pandemic. Thank you so much. There are a few questions right now, which I think is very interesting, and I would like to share with you a question from a viewer. And this viewer asks, how will new education policy measures in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, including Singapore, meet the challenges which youth will encounter during COVID-19 and beyond? This is a perfect question for our Singapore and Malaysia professors, John and Keith. So I throw it out to you guys.
If I could take this first. Yes, this is also a part of the reset that governments will have to think about in terms of the delivery of education. Traditionally, we have gone to school. Our children go to school. It's a transference of knowledge and understanding on the basis of chalk or a marker pen and a whiteboard. So it has been traditional physical delivery of education services. But with the lockdown, schools being closed, our children have got no opportunity of going to school and learning directly from their teachers. And that has imposed this contingency, as Keith said, digital transformation upon the education systems in Southeast Asia and especially in Malaysia. The government has been proactive. It has quickly now gone into online delivery. Institutions of higher education are all online. In fact, in my university, we are doing lectures online so that there is no disruption to classes. So I think, yes, there is a silver lining if we care to look at it, and one of which is the education system. It now it's now incumbent upon the government to double down on the digital transformation of the delivery of education services.
Interesting.
I like what John has, Datuk John has just shared, and fully agree. It's an opportunity for the government to relook at education. Let me just platform it first. What benefits does education provide? In particular, it provides this interesting buffer between being old enough to, when you're old enough to work, which is when you're a bit more mature and have a bit more skill, and when you're old enough to cause trouble, which are for teenagers and such, kind of a buffer. So you have teachers, and it's better to be in front of a teacher than be in front of police or what have you, right? So learning, right now, we've set up an education system where people came into boxes, they came and sat down, they heard a bell, you know, go to this class, time for lunch, and very much that bell was replaced in the manufacturing floor with a whistle, and then you go for lunch, and then you go for coffee break, or you go for your next shift. It was built around manufacturing, and it's been wonderful for 100 and something plus years. Excellent. There's less manufacturing in certain economies. There's a difference in how we can work, whether from home or other places. There's been there's an opportunity, a huge opportunity for parents and kids to get to know each other a bit more, whereas they were always sent in all different directions in the morning. Now they sit around the table in the morning. I'm sure in some families that's wonderful. Wow, so nice. Oh, you know, son, daughter. And I'm sure in other families it's a complete nightmare. I don't know, you know, we have to pray for both, right? Because after a month of this, who knows how to feel as well. Where the kids will be running back to school. But even when they go back to school, like Datuk John said, what are they going to go back to? Are we still going to have our best teachers trapped in a box? You see, our best teachers that are in front of a classroom, the rest of the entire community, the country, the world doesn't get to see them. And my son, he's 15 years old. He's now 16, sorry. He's been taking a course from Harvard on computer science. And he's about to graduate with that. He'll get his certificate from Harvard at 16 years old here in Singapore. I mean, that's an amazing type of thing where he gets to see one of the best computer science professors in the world share about what computer science is. And you know that one of the things that school and education was always meant to do was to inspire us toward a particular direction in our life, for us to realize to what is our skill, what can we do more? And so I believe that education has this opportunity to look very introspectively and say, when this is done, do we return back to the old norm, or do we return to something very different, like you highlighted, Joshua, as well?
Well, a new normal, perhaps. Yeah, I realized that the overarching message that we want to bring to our APO member economies is how could we allow their small and medium enterprises, SMEs, build economic resilience and ensure business continuity to tide through this COVID-19 pandemic. There is a question about how SMEs should deal with this situation. Let's say, for example, John and Keith, we are both businessmen and we are owners of small and medium enterprises in our APO economies. How can we deal with this pandemic from an enterprise level, knowing that, you know, up to 60% of global SMEs may never recover or will go bankrupt, according to the latest Harvard Business Review research article?
I think you are right. I don't think I'm right. I think you are right. That SMEs, they are like the proverbial goose that lays the golden egg. And as you rightly quoted the statistics, some 50% of the SMEs will go under because of this crisis. And they had not thought of this crisis. They had not thought about such a thing happening to them. But they are 98% of all establishments, for example, in Malaysia, They contribute some 40% of the economic output, and they employ 2/3 of the population. The figures might vary across countries, but essentially they are a crucial part of the economy. So how can businesses be able to live and survive during these trying times? Of course,
Yes.
the governments have come expeditiously in trying to keep them afloat. There has been a whole host of incentives, right from interest payment, loan deferrals. The governments have given them in government or semi-government or government-linked companies, business premises, retail premises, discounts, full or partial exemption of rental. They have been given job retention scheme payouts. They have been given wage subsidy, and they've even been given loans, interest-free loans. In fact, even US is thinking of giving it to them without any idea of getting it back. So the government has done its part of the deal. Of course, we can ask, would this be enough? Surely it would not be enough. Of course, the bonds are unlimited, but the government's resources are limited. So there's that much that the government can do. So now it is incumbent upon the businesses to make the best of this opportunities, incentives that are given to keep themselves just above the water, hoping that this pandemic will go off early, go off quickly, and then they'll be able to spring back into action. And I think what is important is for the government to target businesses that are vital to the economy. Businesses like utilities, businesses like telecommunications. These are businesses that need to be really kept afloat. And of course, those businesses that are critical to their respective value chains. It doesn't mean that other businesses can go down under, no. But among the priorities, these must be given the first. And I think businesses will have to take the opportunity to fall back on the government incentives. And of course, it's also incumbent upon the government to ensure that the rules and processes that are put in place to make available these incentives and subsidies are not too taxing to businesses. They are simplified.
Yes, I love your point about how government stimulus packages should be distributed even more effectively and efficiently to target those essential businesses. You talked about utilities, telecommunications, and perhaps even aviation. So Keith, I understand you have a best-selling book in Amazon, which is Actionable Intelligence. You wrote about how actionable intelligence and big data sense making can help businesses recover. So perhaps could you share with us, how can governments and businesses recover from this negative economic impacts of COVID-19 using actionable intelligence?
Thanks for that question. And I've been very humbled that some people have found the book to be interesting.
It was a good book. I read the chapter. It was good. I like the story about the Chinese warrior.
Oh, thank you.
I read a story about the journey by Moses, bringing Moses across the Jordan River.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. You're making me blush here as well. So I think that I wanted to agree with what Datuk John had also mentioned. SMEs and such need to realize that it was always about the customer. So in order for them to survive, they're going to need to go back and say, well, it wasn't really my product. It was what the customer needed. It wasn't my brand. It's how I delighted and supported the customers. And I think there's no better place to look than Japan to see how businesses survive crisis. I was looking at Uniqlo's stock price, which is actually fast retailing. Fast retailing is a great, I love to wear Uniqlo things. This shirt is Uniqlo, fantastic quality, great price. And Then I realized fast retailing actually started as a Japanese company in 1949. You know, they've seen a lot, and we now know them as Uniqlo. They had, then I looked at Shiseido, and Shiseido, you know, and cosmetics is evergreen, no matter what's happening, women will buy. And Shiseido was started back in 1872. So I said, wow, you know, there's been a lot of crises and they've survived. We have to take a very close look at how Japanese companies make it through. And so we should have hope for the SMEs in this area. In terms of what they need to look at, though, I thought it was a very insightful Japanese family, and that had put together over many generations a set of commandments that they live by, kind of a set of mission statements they live by. And one of them was any business idea they would study and then share with their family members and work on it together. I said, wow, you know, if every family did that in every community, they would have a very long lasting situation. So let me share with you, though, about actionable intelligence and the process that organizations need to follow in order for it to be right. Do you all see my screen? Just want to double check.
We do.
Okay. And so there's an actionable intelligence process. Remember, actionable intelligence having the right information in the right person's hands at the right time to improve outcomes. And it starts from having a great question. Key business, government questions. Using an ideation session to bring those questions to bear, figuring out what are the potential problems and goals that need to be solved. I want you to notice that intelligence doesn't start by, oh, let's get all the data together. You'll never have all the data. There's no such thing as all the data. You start off with very good questions first. And then you go and say, well, if we were to answer these questions, and sorry, this is from a business perspective, governments, you might close your eye on the monetized part, but I do want you to look at how you act on opportunities. You go and track what the benefits were so you can share with the population, hey, look at what we've done for you. Look at what's been achieved. Look at how you can live better now. Share the achievements of answering the questions. We never cared about the data. It was the answers that we were looking for. And so starting with good questions, knowing what the benefit of answering those questions are, then you can begin to go and get the data. So you acquire the data. Naturally, it's going to be messy. You expect the data to be a mess. It's okay because some of the data is good. Use the good data. I've seen so many times when projects stop, wow, the data is all not clean and I can't, come on, some of it's good. And by the way, where it's not clean, so go and fix it. But now you have a reason to. A mistake is, let's clean up all the data. No, impossible. The right way is, I have this question and I need this data to answer it. Let's clean up that data. Okay, now you have a reason. And you know what's going to happen? Once you find and visualize the opportunities and the performance that's there, and let me just annotate this so you can see exactly where I'm looking. Once you begin to get the opportunities in place, and once you've identified the current situations, and you track and share your achievements, that's when people are going to really care about getting the data clean, acquiring new data, etc. So please, please, please start the right way. Start with a good set of questions, understanding the value of answering them, then go and get the data and visualize it and then answer and take action. The most important part of this thing is please take action, deliver. You have a goal, you had a project, make sure it gets built, make sure it's done, make sure the quality is there, make sure that you are measured not on that you got the contract signed, but you're measured on that how much was delivered to the community. What did they benefit from that contract? And last point, too many times the IT department is responsible for getting we put in the system, No way, right? Imagine Apple said, hey, we finished the iPhone, we're done, no more. iPhone version 1, okay, you guys are satisfied, right? That didn't happen. We're on iPhone version 11, right? So how can it be that IT departments are responsible just to deliver the project? No, they're responsible to deliver the adoption, that people actually use the information, because intelligence is always optional. Intelligence is optional. So you have to make sure people get it, use it, deliver results with it. And that goes through the entire place. And I just want to finish on one more thing. To make sure it happens, you either have to celebrate the person who gets the high adoption, promote them, put them on the newspaper. Don't be jealous. Go along with it. But on the other hand, if they don't deliver, put them on the newspaper too. Even if you're friends and family, put them in the A. You know what? You were supposed to deliver this thing. It wasn't done. Sorry, you're in the newspaper because you didn't, and you're not going to do it again.
So naming and
thank
shaming.
you so much, Keith. This is really great. We have come to the end, and we have still have 20 more questions from the viewers. But what we are going to do is, don't worry about this. Thank you so much, both Professor Keith and Professor Xavier. We have just gone live with Professor Keith Carter from the National University of Singapore, as well as Professor Datuk Xavier of Putra Business School, Malaysia, to talk about how to keep calm during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have discussed how individuals can remain productive while telecommuting, and how governments can build economic resilience and business continuity through fiscal and monetary policies. SMEs and people remain our top priority. This principle has guided many of our decisions over the last 2 months, including maximizing digital learning platforms to contribute to economic resilience and business continuity in this APO community, which is about 2.8 billion people strong. So about 2.8 billion people are our potential clients. It remains unsure whether the pandemic can be brought under control. But when it does, you can be sure that Professor Keith, Professor Xavier, and the APO Secretariat will be ready to welcome you back to our multi-country programs and once again deliver the dedicated individual country programs that you have come to expect and also cherished from us. And I would like to end with this, with Professor Keith and Professor Xavier. Let us have knowledge being the antidote to fear. And let us have solidarity within the 2.8 billion APO community to be the antidote to blame. And let our shared values within the Asian Productivity Organization be the antidote to our common threat. So Keith and John, I wish you staying safe and healthy and stay productive as always. So this is Joshua Lau from the Asian Productivity Organization in Tokyo, wishing you and your loved ones the very best. I will see you at the next few series of the APO Productivity Talk, where we feature world-leading resource experts and guest speakers to talk on topics that is relevant to all of us. Bye-bye, Keith. Bye-bye, John.
Bye. Bye all. Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank
opportunity.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.